Muito boa tarde. Good afternoon. Can I please ask you to start sitting yourselves? I think we have a few more people coming over from the coffee break. Thank you so much for being here this afternoon. We have a lot of pressure after the first panel. That was so great. Thank you so much to the American Embassy, to Art in Embassies. When Ambassador Levine, I think in her first weeks in Lisbon, first told me about this program, I think I can confess now that I had no idea what she was talking about because Portugal doesn't really have a program like this. No, you knew, I didn't. But I was excited by your excitement. And it has indeed been, I think it has exceeded everybody's expectations. What we've had here in Lisbon for the last 3 days has been truly amazing. And thank you so much to everybody who put it together. First of all, of course, our artists, those of the first panels, of yesterday's panels, and of course, my, so to speak, artists. I am extremely humbled to be sitting on this stage with Deborah, Amy, Mónica, and Nick. From the beginning, the first time we spoke, I knew this was going to be an incredible panel, so I am actually going to shut up. It's bad enough that my picture is so loud. And I'm going to ask Deborah Willis to take it away. She almost doesn't need any kind of presentation. I just want to reinforce that besides being an artist and a photographer, she's a researcher, an investigator, a writer, and today she'll be talking to us about all those different aspects of her work that have enriched us so much. Go ahead, Debbie.
Great. Thank you. It's really, thank you. Thank you all, and thank you, Ambassador, for this invitation. It's really an honor. I was here, and I think Felipe is here somewhere, and Belaine, oh, there, right. And it was really a great opportunity and to be here. I'm going to talk, I have my timer, I'm on time. But I want to talk about a few projects about imagination, which I really love to hear Chris Myers. I love Chris Myers, of course, always. But I love hearing the idea about how do we think about imagination through the arts? How do we tell difficult stories during desperate times? And when we think about desperate times, we always think about how do we talk about freedom? And Cheryl Finley and I co-curated an exhibition, Free as They Want to Be, Artists Committed to Memory. I'm going to walk through some concepts of hope. How do we think about possibilities of freedom? How do we tell stories through the mind of spirit, heart, and through identities? And I'm going to start with the cover of the book, catalog, and this is a work by Bisa Butler, who focused on Frederick Douglass and his image. She was always interested, as we think about artists committed to memory, how do we think about the stories we were taught, the stories we believed, the stories that we challenged about how identities were formed. I started working as a curator in 1980. I was at the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture in New York. I was always interested in the lack of information about Black photographers when I studied photography. There was a photographer, I was doing my research, I found a Black photographer who was working in Cincinnati, his name was J.P. Ball, and he focused on his studio. He was an abolitionist. He fought in terms of the identity of Blackness and the identity of how do we talk about freedom. But his studio was welcomed and a welcome opportunity for a lot of people to visit in Cincinnati, Black, white, free, and enslaved people who were a part of his studio. And here is a reproduction in a magazine plus an ad about his work. This is also a contemporary, as we talk about how artists are committed to memory. Isaac Julian has a show right now at the Tate Britain in London, but he also is looking at the history of J.P. Ball and in terms of his notion of J.P. Ball, the notion of Frederick Douglass, and wanted to put the two of them together. Lessons of the Hour is a project. He knew that J.P. Ball photographed Frederick Douglass. And so here are reenactments of some of the moments that he wanted to discover. He found a model to portray J.P. Ball using the photograph of J.P. Ball. He also used this image of the studio, of imagining J.P. Ball photographing Frederick Douglass. And as we see in this image, he recreates the National Gallery as J.P. Ball's studio. So this is when we talk about imagination, we're thinking about what inspires artists, is going back into the archives, thinking about fashion, dress, identity, freedom. And here he has the freedom to reconnect to the photographic moment of J.P. Ball and Frederick Douglass. He hires the curators who wear period dress, and here we see the curators. There we see Frederick Douglass, the imagined new contemporary Frederick Douglass through this posing, but also Frederick Douglass's wife, an image of his wife. We also see here in this image here, I'm going to go with my timing, and I hope you'll see what I mean, just the excitement of finding artists who are looking through the lens of history. He's reimagining Frederick Douglass, looking for that image, because Frederick Douglass always thought that photography was biography. How do we read the body of a Black person who was enslaved and not seen as human? And here he's beginning to look for images with the curators who are in period dress, but also imagining other people waiting, patrons waiting for that experience. And here is the photograph that he made of Frederick Douglass during the time, and this is in the Cincinnati Museum, and the contemporary tintype that was made by an artist living in California. These are just some of the photographs from Frederick Douglass, from J.P. Ball's studio, of families, reimagining this period in the 1840s and 50s where most people were enslaved, and here we have reimagined this experience of a woman who cross-dresses as a boy for freedom. And here there are two soldiers who are facing, proudly showing that they arrived in Cincinnati protecting this young boy, quote unquote, who was a girl. And here she visits the studio to be photographed to show that she has made it to freedom. And this is a photograph of showing the celebration with that moment. Again, Frederick Douglass is part of the memory, as I mentioned earlier, of the artists who are creating ideas about freedom. You know, freedom of dress, that Frederick Douglass's wife also designed some of his clothes. She also bought his freedom, so that exchange of freedom. But then with Bisa Butler, she is exploring how do we think about the diaspora, the experience of migration, the experience of how do we move forward with dress, fashion, and then today using symbols from the idea of a dandy. He also spoke. There is also another artist, that Omar Victor Diop. He also used the idea of Frederick Douglass as an inspiration, self-portrait, where he used, when we think about the 19th century with Black men who traveled, we thought most men were, today in the 21st century, we see Black men who traveled, often they were sportsmen. In the 19th century, Black men who traveled, they were abolitionists. They were talking about freedom, talking about ideas that we consider, how do we provide humanity, a story about Black people. Here we see other people that he imagined. Omar Victor Diop decided to reimagine. Equinano, who wrote about his experience of slavery, and this prominent man who lived in London, who also lived in the States and talked about freedom in different ways. And then Hank Willis Thomas looked at a photograph of Ernest Withers, I Am a Man, which was 1968. The experience of I Am a Man, unbelievable that someone could walk through a protest with a sign, trying to prove their humanity with signs, and here we see this image. Hank Willis Thomas takes this sign and moves forward with the image by using I am, and then looking at the history of the Constitution through today. I am 3/5 of a man. Am I a man? Questioning that experience, and then the vernacular be a man through the experience of who's the man from the vernacular of the 70s to the 80s to I am human, and creating a poem with this experience. I am many, I am, amen. And it's wonderful to see one of the pieces in the Embassies, in the Embassy exhibition. And it's a great piece when we think about the woman, Sojourner Truth, who says that she is a woman. And here we also look at works that, three-dimensional works that Hank Willis Thomas looks at the protest photographs of Charles Moore. Hank Willis Thomas is my son. I didn't get a chance to say that yet. But I always have the point when I know when I'm going to say it. So, but having that experience of growing up in the archives, Hank grew up in the archives, looking at images, questioning the experience of how Black people survived during the struggle of the 60s. And here we can imagine a man who is dressed to protest, to vote. And here guns and policemen are having dogs tear apart his clothing. Hank recreated this in a three-dimensional form by using this experience, wanting his visitors to reimagine the two-dimensional aspect of a photograph. And these are what artists are doing. Here's Bisa looking at Harriet Tubman, a photograph that was recently discovered, and a young Harriet Tubman that we had not seen as often as we would like to know how Harriet Tubman survived as a young woman. And here we see this image. And then this image here, passing it. I think it's stuck. Yep, I'll go back again. Delphine Fuundu, who has a cape. So this is slowing up again. Can you push it forward for me in the booth? Okay, we'll go back to Delphine. This is Daisha Harris, who's looking at the idea of liberty and freedom through the Underground Railroad, where when Black people left the South through the guidance of Harriet Tubman and others, that they were walking through waters, and still waters, as she says, run deep, looking for ways to survive and going north to New York as well as to Canada. And so here she recreates this experience of freedom through running through with young babies. Kathy Opie also looking at protests from the monuments, and in terms of monuments. She's in the Lee Monument in Richmond, Virginia, where she photographs all of the statements that are around and created the voices and created an installation of as she traveled from sunset to sundown through different cities, looking at the experience of the monument protest over a time period. And here is an installation of some of the images from Free as They Want to Be. And when the exhibition, in terms of depicting what it meant to be persistent about it, from history, Carrie Mae Weems, she's looking in the mirror of history to say, I looked and looked to see what so terrified you. She recognized her beauty. She knew that Black people recognized their beauty. But the negative images that portrayed over a time period is difficult for her to imagine, because as she reaffirms her beauty, but also looking at the quilts, the dresses that are made out of quilts, and the design of a quilt is a log cabin design of a quilt. She also created a piece down here below, looking at the sky. How do we think about hope and reimagine this future? She's also thinking about how Black people in the 19th century, 18th century, also thought about this experience. And this following up, taking us home to the kitchen table, where we share moments of love, respect, but also how do we think about survival through home and storytelling. She's also going into museums, asking the question, where do I belong? How do I see myself? And then questioning, going into the museums around the world, and as part of her roaming series. And these are artists who were in the exhibition and some were not. Renee Cox also has a project, The Signing, and she invited a number of artists to wear period clothing, imagine their stories as she recreates the historical painting of the signing of the Constitution. And here again, we begin to see how artists are looking at the gaps in their histories, looking at ways to tell different stories. Rose DeSano is another artist who lives in Brooklyn, and she's creating monuments to women, these unsung women, these women who are unknown, and she's creating all of these monuments in different places. She has some are three-dimensional in actual spots, but then they're also through digital experiences. And just recognizing the first Black woman doctor, recognizing different stories. Elaine Rodriguez, another artist who's looking at the idea of the Orisha. How do we think about fertility? How do we birth generations of revolutionary women? And here she is telling that story through dress, but also through this experience of the Orishas. And then this is another experience for me, is thinking about women who are looking at trying to vote at a time in the 19th century and through the 21st century, to the 20th century. And Jamie Sun-woo, she created this Equality Tea video. And can you push the button for the video? I'm not sure if it'll, okay. And I'm gonna only show a clip of it. If we can put the sound up, please, sound.
Merch the British import.
She's
At
actually...
this raucous tea party, they cried, "No taxation without representation." Disguised as Native Americans, the Sons of Liberty darkened their faces with soot, wielded tomahawks, and bellowed a war cry against their colonial oppressors. To abstain from British tea, the Daughters of Liberty brewed Native American red root, an elixir they branded.
Looking at colonialism, stories that ignored the contributions of women.
Independence. At last, a land for the American man. But women had no say without the right to vote, so they too demanded no taxation without representation. Armed with teacups and saucers, their tea party led to America's first women's rights convention at Seneca Falls. And so, the suffragists brewed ideas in tea rooms and organized tea party
And then she challenges this
charitable
history.
tea brands like Equality Tea.
And when she thinks about equality tea, where are Black women, where are Asian women, where are Latinx women?
taste of
And this is
freedom
part
each
of this
sip.
story that she tells.
But
That
could they taste the underlying notes? The sweet aroma of Indian poppy fields, where the British East India Company manufactured opium to sell for Chinese tea. The smoky ash embedded in opium pipes throughout China, an addiction the British built to sustain the empire's tea habit.
so
The
this
metallic
whole
taste of
idea of the
bloodshed
Tea
during
Party
the opium wars
challenges
that
it in many ways.
the bitter grime off the hands of Robert Fortune, who disguised himself.
Okay, I'm going to move forward to, I know it's a 6-minute video, and I just want to move forward to some of the other works. Beyonce, photograph by a photographer, Tyler Mitchell. He's looking also at the history of women and women in work. He's the first Black photographer on the cover of Vogue magazine, but he uses the domestic space of a washerwoman, the women who are the clothesline and that experience with that image. And then this is the exhibition that I curated with women for the 100 women in terms of the vote, the 100 years, 100 women, and the women for voting. The experience that women had in terms of looking at their archives, Zalika Azim, their family archives, when we think about migration to New York and migration to other areas. Maud Salter, looking at the history of representation of women in painting using photography. And then Mickaleen Thomas, the exact same experiences. How do we look at historical paintings and find themselves within that experience? The work by Adama Delphine Fuundu, who's looking at old newspapers and using her, imagining reading these stories about women and empowerment through this experience. And these are my images I wanted to show of my work as I'm looking at the history of Black Civil War soldiers in an exhibition as we think about the rising sun. How do we experience, can we push the video with this as well? I created a video with historical photographs using images from the 19th century and Joan Baez's song, Civil War. And here I work with a choreographer who creates this moment of telling the story about freedom and ways to look at fashion and performance in creating this experience. Just want to say thank you, and I'm going to stop here. Okay?
Thank you so much, Deborah, not just for your presentation, but for all your work and for sharing. You're rescuing so many artists and photographers from oblivion and then sharing it with us. For those of you who are sad that it ended, know that Deborah Willis will be tomorrow at Hangar at 6 o'clock, so you'll have a little bit more from Deborah Willis. I would like now to pass the floor to Amy Sherald. Amy, I don't know if you want to do it from there? From there? Very good. Amy, when we spoke, she told me that even if she climbs the Everest, people will still say, they won't say Amy Sherald climbed the Everest, they will say the painter who painted Michelle Obama climbed the Everest.
It's true.
That's not why she's here today. That is not why she's here today.
Yeah, true that.
Yeah, she's not here because of that. It's perhaps something one has to mention when one talks of Amy Sherald, but actually she's here today to talk about something completely different. She's done a lot before and after that painting, and that's what she's here to talk about today. So take it away, Amy.
Thank you. I mean, it's a wonderful thing to have to precede your reputation. So I accept it with grace. So it's really wonderful that I'm going after Dr. Willis here because I feel like you've influenced my work so much and my ideas about photography and painting. So I spent hours as a child looking at photographs of my family. We had a cabinet in our family room where we kept all of our photographs. It was where I would end up on rainy days when there was nothing on TV. There were these photographs that I spent a great amount of time with, particularly this image of my grandmother, Jewel. We only had one photo of her, and I never got to meet her because she died during childbirth. But these kinds of photographs have always captivated me because of their aesthetic, but also because of the narrative that they employed. They are a part of a self-authored historical narrative, and they have become symbolic in ways that allow them to be used as archetypes. I like to throw this in here for fun. This is me and my brother and my sister. No, my sister's not adopted. We're from the South, and it's just all matched up down there. But speaking of photography, again, like these are the images that I grew up with. And I also spent much of my downtime thumbing through books that my parents had on the shelves in our family room. And this is what art was, and this is the kind of art that I had exposure to. I did not pay much attention to the composition itself when I looked at these kinds of paintings, but as to how well everything was rendered. When I say composition, I wasn't looking at this at a young age and thinking that I wasn't seeing myself. So I was looking at fingers and colors and shadows and things like that. And we couldn't get through this kind of conversation without bringing up Frederick Douglass, because representation is hugely important. When you lack images of yourself in art and in the media that claims to showcase the world, or when images are warped or ugly, it creates a palpable thirst for something more. And so I began to look at portraiture through the lens of photography. I think we are all familiar with this image, of course. Frederick Douglass and his story. Frederick used this image used his image in this way. So both Douglass and Du Bois took advantage of the invention of the camera and employed it specifically to change the way Black people were seen. He engaged in the politics of representation through photographic images, and his images were more than just vanity sittings. Douglass was photographed over 160 times and considered his photography a crucial aid in the quest to end slavery and to achieve civil rights. He created a visual legacy with Daguerre's invention. I love this quote when he speaks about photography being the most democratic of the arts. He says, "The humblest servant girl may now possess a picture of herself, such as the wealth of kings could not purchase 50 years ago. Photography dignified the poorest of the poor. It was a potent equalizer. Frederick Douglass went so far as to say, the moral and social influence of pictures was more important in shaping national culture than the making of its laws. At the turn of the century, Du Bois compiled a series of photographs for the American Negro exhibition that we've heard about also this evening in Paris. He organized the 363 images into albums entitled Types of American Negroes, Georgia, USA, Negro Life in Georgia. And when I came across this exhibition, being from Georgia, I was immediately drawn to it, and I realized that it was affirming to me my process and the direction that I was moving in my work, because I felt like we were doing the same thing and had the same manifesto. These images here are about respectability politics. And although we are being ourselves, it is still a performance of respectability. These were representational systems in action, and these images to me were solid evidence of existing and connected me to a part of my past that was love. So photography became this vernacular language capturing people in their immediacy. So I began to connect these photographs along with snapshots of African Americans in everyday life with paintings. These images, the image on the right, were collected by my colleague and friend June Lee for a project he called Fade Resistance. These are all orphaned photographs. He imagines these photos to have been precious keepsakes, at least to the people that they belong to, long before it became fashionable to tweet, Instagram, or snap our own carefully staged realities with selfie sticks and flattering filters. These families empowered themselves with Polaroids to curate their own lives. Buying the photos at yard sales and on eBay, Lee has prevented them from ending up in the waste bin of visual history. So this is Polaroid on the right and Blue Boy by Thomas Gainsborough on the left. The images document Black life in the same vein that traditional portrait paintings of white aristocracy serve to trace social and cultural histories. Absent from these orthodox lineages, Black families and individuals exercise photography as an organic, immediate means of attaining personal and ultimate political agency. I made my own, obviously, mother and child. These photographs started to become, for me, a way of reclaiming time. Moving into a similar but different language, they have become symbolic of a history of American Blacks that was not rendered in paint. They are deeply intimate and vibrant photographs. Families empowered themselves with Polaroids to curate their own lives. Buying the photos at yard sales and on eBay, Lee has prevented them from, I already said that, sorry, I forgot to delete that. And I really love this combination together. I had a lot of fun going through those photographs and matching them with these historical paintings. So my work has become a meditation on photography, and photography is what offered me another way to see portraiture beyond the reign of European paintings. And here we have a detail of a Titian painting alongside a young boy and his dog. So fast forward a little bit, I jumped into some American iconographic photographs. This is Alfred Einstadt's photograph of a sailor kissing a woman in Times Square after the news broke of the Japanese surrender in World War II. And it has lived a storied life, and it was taken on August 15th, 1945. And when I saw this image, I thought it had the capacity to offer context to current issues. So this is For Love and for Country. There's a long history of censorship and erasure that has weighted down the gay kiss with meaning. It's often excluded from view. I think we are living in a kairotic moment. I was considering the deployment of a man-on-man kissing, of man-on-man kissing specifically as a juggernaut in the broader project of queer world-making, which requires an emphasis on visibility. Where same-sex marriages are being threatened, where there's oftentimes fatal violence inflicted against the transgender and non-binary conforming community. This kiss is about the politics of visual pleasure between same-sex couples. This image is of Van Dyck from the 17th century's painting of Charles I, King of England. And I Jedi mind tricked you, and I'm kidding. So these are two paintings from my last exhibition, The World We Make. These are 12 o'clock boys. I was introduced to this culture when I moved to Baltimore for graduate school and sitting at a red light in Baltimore, Maryland, as 20 dirt bikes would come zooming by, and one of them would confidently stop and put his foot on your car to let you know that you're not going anywhere until we pass. And so I don't create work from a place of being reactionary to the European canon or the American canon or its historical framework, because I believe that by thinking that way, I'm centralizing whiteness historically, where everything else lives outside of that as a center subject. So I'm putting myself in the center, I'm putting these guys in the center, and my production is about putting my version of Blackness into the world, because Blackness isn't monolithic. I'm creating my own canon along with reflecting on the absence of myself within the existing historical narratives around images and image making. So I've been wanting to do this diptych for a long time, and after living in Baltimore for 16 years, I moved to New York, and I finally had the chance to put it together, to get these guys to come to my studio and set up a camera, and I had them going back and forth in the parking lot of my studio doing wheelies. Got in a little bit of trouble, but it was well worth it. I asked them why they love to ride, and they say it's about a sense of freedom. And I felt like by saying that, they meant it's about freedom from oppression. I think for a lot of these guys, it's they're making a better decision for their lives to get on a bike. And the name of this piece is called Deliverance. So although the work captures the individual experience, specifically the Black experience, its resonances should be manifold and far-reaching. And so with our minds trained on long-standing art historical motifs, Deliverance almost inevitably recalls the classic equestrian portraits of aristocrats or imperial rulers produced by old masters like Rubens or Van Dyck or Jacques Louis David. This is Charles Ebbett's photograph launched atop a skyscraper of the Rockefeller Center. And this is my painting, If You Surrender to the Air, You Could Ride It. And the title comes from Toni Morrison's Song of Solomon. And this painting is a young man perched on a green construction beam, gazing towards or above you, the viewer. And the Rockefeller Building was and is a symbol of American prosperity. But for me, this narrative blatantly overlooks free labor. And I wanted to kind of capture this moment. I feel like whenever I hear our American politicians talk about the history of the country and our forefathers, they always leave out the important part, which is like, we are a powerful country because we had enslaved people working free for us. This is an image of the G's Ben Quilters, bringing that history forward to our favorite queen. And I'm going to end with this image of the portrait of the former First Lady Michelle Obama. When I was thinking about this painting and how I wanted to pursue it, it was important to me that I was bringing history forward in a way that allowed her to be meaningfully present within the African American experience and our history, but also centering her experiences as the first Black First Lady, along with speaking to American history and art history at the same time. The pattern of the dress immediately reminded me of the G-spin quilters. And these women and their quilting are such an important part of our Black American story, and I thought that the patterns grounded her within that narrative in a way that wasn't didactic, but I was still able to get the point across that she was a first. And I just wanted to end with this quote: "Identity for all of us is this perpetual process. It's somewhat like constantly cleaning out and rearranging an attic. It's as much about throwing out the furniture and trinkets that no longer serve us as it is bringing in new ones. In that sense, it's just as important to continue defining who we are as it is to define who we are not." And I don't know whose quote this is, but I got it from Brain Pickings.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Amy Sherald. I think you can see a connection, which isn't completely accidental, but then again, not again, completely on purpose, through Dr. Deborah Willey's presentation, Amy Sherald's, and I suspect now with Mónica Miranda, we will also enter these themes of identity, archives, ancestry, and then continue with Nick Cave. Mónica, you are a co-founder of Hangar, as I mentioned, which is a very important space of artistic and research center in Lisbon. You're also a producer, an archivist, as I mentioned, and today you will be talking to us about your work, which I think in many ways will continue the themes we've been talking about. Would you like me to try to, you can do it? Okay.
So first, I want to thank for this opportunity, and it's been an amazing couple of days, this meeting. It's not always that we have this opportunity to meet with you guys. I've learned a lot, and I hope that we can carry on what came out from this meeting during these days. My work resonates a lot with what you were saying in terms of storytelling. And I've been interested in telling stories, and I've been interested in listening to stories of places. It's been important to know my place and to talk from my place, from my own biography, and it's from that place that everything comes out. So I was born in Portugal with Angolan heritage, so this in-between zone has been fundamental. And art has been a way of me understanding this place and where do I come from. And also I'm interested on bringing into play time and understanding time as and the interconnection in between different time. The past, my own history, colonization, all that is involved with ancestry, and bringing into a present temporality these historical facts, so bringing the archives into a present. But a present is a fraction of a second, because as I'm talking, past is gone. So it's in the present that we can reimagine a future, and this is when I work a lot with critical fabulations, quoting Hartman, also to bring these historical facts and the connection with the fictional narratives to fill up that gap that is not in the official story. So the first story I'm going to tell, it was when I arrived to Lisbon, and this is not an official map, it's a Lisbon map of the military roads. If you search and Google military road, you will find little spots around the town. So what it was a continuous military road that was built in the 19th centuries to defend the city against the French and English invasions. It's gone. What we have now is a new road. There is still a fortress that is defending the city from migrants to coming in. So all the neighborhoods illegal, they are placed on these roads, from Cova da Moura, 6 de Maio, Azinhaga dos Besouros. So when I arrived to the city, there is, a duality. The city has a duality in between who lives outside these circular roads and who lives inside. And from my own experience and my own connections, of course, I started to know a lot the city that was outside. So these military roads, it was the beginning of my arrival to Lisbon. And I've been photographing these spaces for about 10 years. And I've been doing a series of different works around these roads. So here you have two times together. You have the past roads and the present roads simultaneously. And then you cannot see so well, but there is like different dots. And there is red dots where it signals where the neighborhoods illegals are. So it's bringing is bringing to visibility that invisible city that is not recognized in the official narrative. So the first work I did when I came here, and I didn't have so many means to do the films I'm doing now that I'm going to show. I went on a road trip to understand Lisbon and these liminal spaces. And it's just a film where I put a camera in front of the car, and inside there is the father of my daughter, ex-military from Cape Verde, that he was telling the story from the past, and a resident from this neighborhood. So what you hear is us talking in the car, and then you see the car moving through these spaces. So this was in 2009. After 10 years, I was invited to be part of a prize, and I wanted to bring again this discourse in because it was in a big foundation, Matt, and I thought Lisbon had to be the discussion. So I did a stage, also a sculptural video installation, where the stage actually recreates some of the social neighborhoods where there is social areas of communality, also bringing into understanding that these places are places of resistance and places of sharing, of radical solidarity. So the stage invites people to come in and to watch the film inside of the work itself. This is some of the stills of the film. What I brought into the film, it was bringing this past and this present together and bringing some of the characters that they make part of this road. So I work a lot with synchronicity. While I was finding the spaces, some of them, because I was photographing for 10 years and I have close connection, the spaces were telling me the story. It was not that I get locked in my studio and inspiration arrives. I actually like to touch reality and document, but also because some of the narratives from these spaces are portrayed in very stereotypal ways. I wanted to tell another story and tell another narrative. So this is when, after I did this exhibition, the council invited me to show these images, more documental, that I had from the city. That I never show as artwork, especially because they show what you see from the exterior, from these neighborhoods. And there was so much in the media about Jamaica and all other neighborhoods and how much violent they are. And I wanted to show what is inside. And I didn't want to show what I photographed, because what I did photography was because I had personal relationships with places, and I was part of an activist group, and I was recording something. They had a social value, not a capital value. But after 10 years, I realized that this city is gone. It became invisible. So I donated this image to the archive of Lisbon, 200 images, and I asked them, I wanted to do another work about the military road. So I went to the demolished houses and I picked up the objects they were left there. And I gave these objects to Angolan writers. There you can see some of the parts of the writing, to to bring another meta-narrative to these spaces and to get away from stereotypes and to tell what is inside of the house. As I became an archaeology with the writers of these new spaces, of new possibilities. I think the image, you cannot see the image? No? Something happened? Okay, so I pass. So I move on now to still a story that has to do with my experience in Lisbon, in Portugal. And this is The Island. The Island, it was commissioned by Autograph in London. It was an exhibition last year. And I wanted to start with this image, Whistle in the Wind, whistle, as being something you cannot grab, it comes and is ethereal and you cannot reach. And as the wind, and it flows and it goes across many different spaces and landscapes. And this particular image, it conceals in itself many times, cyclical times, a feminine time, deep time, geological time, human time, and the relationship of human body with the nature body. So it's understanding these different bodies that we have, the physical, and the relationship in between the physical, spiritual, emotional, and how many bodies we have in this landscape. And this landscape, it signals a violence of extractivism because it's a quarry. And there is 300 quarries abandoned in Alentejo, where actually there was a black population that is not in the official books. And where they were living was called the Island. And next to this place, the quarries stand. So as there is scars on the landscape, there was scars on our bodies. But I want to recall here ecology of care and transformation and repair, because you see it's a lake now. So the landscape, it changed, and oops, and it became, what happened? Okay. So the island also stands here for this diaspora space, and this was done in the COVID time when I wrote the script also for a film. I will show you in a while. And I was in my house imagining an island that was a Tolkien place, that we could recreate our own realities in a different way. So this is some of the words from the film. They are wrote with an Angolan writer, Yara Monteiro. And this is the entry point for the exhibition. And this is actually comes from a book, In Defense of Nature, from Amilcar Cabral from 1951. Amilcar Cabral was a freedom fighter. And he was an agronomer also. So he said that to defend the land is to defend humanity. So in his strategy to defeat the colonial power, he had in his strategy a renewal of the land. So, and he recalled that monocultures and nature was the first thing to be colonized. And just by changing that into a place, land and agriculture, and changing it to a place of diversity and bringing on an African strategy of working through the land. There is no Eurocentric, and it was not the colonial, extractivist, capitalist way of exploring the land. And he also recalls that soil is a depository of history and memory. So I work with all these elements in the show, having different sculptures that they bring soil into place. They became living sculptures that they had to be taken care of every day. They are also stages, and I invited, and I have a collaborative practice, and I invited different performances to come, and they activated the sculptures. The twins are always present in my work. They were also present here, and they symbolize this duality of place. So I come from sculptures, so some of my photography, it's three-dimensional. This is some of the sculptures that they were also activated. And I wanted to show you the film. Can we play with sound, please? Just a little bit.
Não te deixes perdida. Não te deixes esquecida. Lembra-te de quem és, quem somos. Respira.
Show you the teaser. Opening. Okay, this is another work. So I just to recall the previous work from the island. There is some people here in the room that they collaborated with me. I want to recognize them also, and it's been done. In the second confinement, we all went in a residency to the countryside, and it was an act of solidarity that the parents of the children, my good friends, they are here, and my child was in the film, and we lived together, and we created the film with very little resources. This is a film in Angola, and the paper of women in the liberation struggle has been one that it hasn't been told, and it's been not well told. So the figure of this woman, Carlota, it recalls also a book by a journalist, a Polish journalist, that he described when he came to Angola in the independence. He described the exodus of the white population that he left the country. And in his book, when he goes into the war zone, when the civil war started, he found this woman, Carlota, that he photographed. And it's the only picture that is in the book. And there is not much that is known about Carlota, because after he met her, she died 2 days after. So I retook that picture and I enacted the story of this woman that we don't know much about. And recalling and telling a story of Carlota. She's not only a freedom fighter from the past, she's a freedom fighter from now. Path to the Stars is also recalls a poem from the first president, Agostinho Neto, that was a poet. And Path to the Stars, it's while during the colonization experience, there was the imagination of a new cosmology and a place to come. So the film is about her journey from sunrise to sunset. She goes by herself in a boat and she looks at the edges of the river, and then she has many visions. So this journey, she recalls many times into herself, the pre-colonial, colonial, her own troubles, spiritually troubles, and then she has conversations and dialogues with her shadow. So it's also a quest of her own liberation through this journey of self-discovery. So this is some of the stills of the film, and it recalls also the ecology disasters. And I show you also the last clip, and I think I will leave it here.
Kizualo kongifwa sanga lanjila sanga janjila uye kwa mama ngongo sanga janjila tutula kwa mama ngongo sanga lanjila tambula mona mubika sanga janjila kotengi mona mama sanga lanjila enjila tuke
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Monica. Time police over there has been making me signals that I deliberately ignored because I think it's a unique opportunity to have these artists here together. There will not be time for questions, but we will have time for Nick Cave. This Nick Cave won't be singing into anyone's arms. I had to make. Well, I was going to say, it's the one thing you can't because you dance, you sculpt, you're an inventor of all sorts. I read, grew up with 7 brothers, and you kept inventing things even as you were little in your grandparents' farm. And today you will be speaking to us about, well, there are many of your works, one of which, the sound suits. I don't have time to get into it now. I'm sure you'll do it.
Me either. But we'll get into...
You will.
We will get
Take your
into
time.
something.
Take it away.
I want to thank Ambassador for the invitation, and it's been an honor to be up here on stage with these amazing women. Okay, is this on a timer or something?
So just so that
Okay.
Reggie knows, this is the sound, the video without sound, right,
This
Nick?
is great. I think these are just images that are on a timer, so I'm just going to talk about the work and really sort of, I think I'm going to start with, being raised by an amazing mother and father that taught me how to stand in my body was really, really, really important when, we live in a world where one's identity could be dictated by who you are and what you are. And so, with that being said, that idea has always been the motivator. It has always been the catalyst for the work that I do. I tend to work in this sort of wide, sort of vast way. I'm interested in my foundation. My history is my foundation, but I'm interested in what perhaps the future looks like. So many times I sort of throw a wide net. And what that means is that wide net then allows me to bring many people into projects, creating space and possibility for others to think about what that means and what that looks like. I'm not one who draws anything. I'm pretty much sort of working from this place of improvisational, this sort of place of trust. I'm a gambler at the end of the day. I'm willing to take that risk. I will throw it all in. But in that sort of process is where I'm interested in sort of the development and seeing what comes out of that. Here, heard at Grand Central Station was a performance that I did with the Avenel School. We did this performance for 2 weeks solid. I thought the first day that I arrived in New York, I was like, 2 weeks, I cannot. But it was so incredible. Every day was so different, but it was so magical. That's Rainbow, by the way. So within the work, there are these political sort of undertones that are there. I don't try to hide anything. I try to be sort of, again, very sort of wide open and really talking and thinking a lot about compassion and empathy and how do we sort of come to a place of understanding in times of trauma. And trauma is real. And so art has always been this vehicle for me to work through that. Heard in Australia. And so I'm interested in community. I'm interested in social services, organizations that, again, we fold into the making. So therefore, everyone receives an experience that is not forgotten. These are images that were pulled from a sort of performance sort of study that then became part of the Grand Central Station mosaic commission that I did. I think there's images of that in here somewhere. But these are my studio assistants. You know, rather than me hiring sort of performance, I'm like, hey, you guys, you want to sort of do jump around a little bit in the work, and so for me, it's really important that my studio assistants also, not only are they sort of working in the studio, but you know, they also understand the vast way in which the work is sort of then sort of put out into the world. And so they go with me to install shows as well as participate in some of these sort of performances. But I'm interested in, you know, I come from a modern dance background. I studied with Avenele, but I come from a fashion world. So I'm just sort of straddling in the center, fluctuating between all of these sort of worlds that influence and sort of drive the work home. This is from an exhibition at Mary Boone's gallery about 15 years ago of the sound suits. You know, the sound suits, the original sound suits started from the incident in '72, Rodney King incident. And that was the moment where my conscience was reawakened. You know, we move through the world thinking that we are sort of aware and present, but you never know what's going to shift that moment. A piece titled Speak Louder. The piece in the background is a tondo, which is me looking at brain scans of inner city youth and sort of merging that with extreme weather patterns. And so that's how that design is created. Working in Atlanta with the Atlanta School of Dance, creating a piece titled Upright. But the sound suits are really sort of constructed of materials of all sorts, a way of hiding gender, class, and race, forcing you to look at something other. A performance titled Upright, where I worked with practitioners and additional performers where they declothed down to their underwear and then were rebuilt. And then became these sort of shaman of sorts. Again, how one's identity can be sort of broken down. And how do we find ways to build ourselves back up? But something else about the work that's important to me is that, you know, I create sort of environments that allow me to invite others to use. And for me, that is sort of, has always been, again, an interesting sort of place for me to work, that it's not that I will create an installation, but function has always been sort of the most important thing. How does this exhibition, how does this installation serve in a greater sort of capacity? Here, an exhibition that was at Cranbrook art museum outside of Detroit. And so that's the sort of performance sort of closet of sorts. And on the back wall is the map in which we performed really throughout Detroit in all of these various locations. Seattle, Washington. A piece that was at Mass MoCA titled Until. Until was a project that Denise Marconish, the curator, came to my studio in Chicago, invited me to do this project at Mass MoCA, said, "You have the largest gallery at Mass MoCA. I will see you in a year." So I'm sort of like, okay. But she said one stipulation, can I do sound suits? And I was like, yes. And so, because I was really transitioning out of that work anyway, but I was still interested in what does it feel like to be in the belly of a sound suit? And so out of that, that was the thought. And then Michael Brown happened. And this piece came out of that incident. As I was working in the studio and I sort of heard the news, this thought came over me, is there racism in heaven? And so this cloudscape was the catalyst for this body of work, which then became this amazing space for performance, for church, for public speaking. So it was really sort of used in so many amazing ways. And I love that when I can be in the room and not have to be part of anything and sort of see how, the space opens up for invitations to sort of be a part of that. A performance piece that was done in Shreveport, Louisiana. Titled Now or Never. So I bring none of these people with me. I sort of bring a project to a city. I then hire the city to build the project. And so we're probably, we're in residency for maybe 3 weeks, all of us collectively. So everyone is seeing the stage being built. I'm talking about just, to these young people, to these artists that have careers, about the process. And so, it's really sort of fascinating for me to sort of step back and allow room for discovery, room for work to be developed, and sort of giving people opportunity and allegiance to sort of direct in a sense. A piece that was done at the New York Park Armory, The Park Armory was a drill hall, but I was interested in drill hall, town hall, dance hall. And so this was a piece where I was really thinking about space that allows us to, we could have our differences, but we can work it out on the dance floor. And so it was really sort of working from that sort of genre. This sort of shredded mylar was a 40-foot tall by 300-foot object moving in space titled Chase. And so it occupied that entire space. In addition to that, there were 40 movers that were hired daily to activate the space. So when visitors would come in, they would sort of work with everyone and dance and sort of create that space. A piece titled Amalgam, done in Boston, which was, again, another sort of collaboration. And then from this piece, we created the Love Parade, which was sort of bringing about 30 communities together where we created floats and then sort of paraded it through the entire city. So a lot of the work also allows me to sort of, through that invitation, sort of, whether or not it's a call and response sort of moment, I'm really sort of just open to all of it because it's, for me, it's none of this work is really for me. It's really for others. It's for the community. And so it's important that I sort of get out of the way in order for that to sort of do the job that I am looking for it to do. A piece in Chicago at the Merchandise Mart building, a video projection. But this is my studio here. It's about 25,000 square feet, but in the front of the studio are these 3 storefront windows. And so during COVID, it was a smile. Then we did mask over the faces. But then when George Floyd happened, we turned the smiles into frowns. And so the amazing thing about this space is that in that moment where I need to sort of react and to respond to what is currently going on in the world, I can. We also invited the community to come and write about racism on the windows. And then across the street is a public high school, and this project that's titled Amends then allowed the community to come out and write an amend and about racism and then hang it on this line, which is called Dirty Laundry. And so then all of that text from that line, we invited a spoken word artist that came and did this sort of spoken word piece. So the fact that it just kept growing and expanding into a greater outreach was really, really quite amazing. And so again, just allowing, it was so sort of frightening when, there was only one amends on the line and we were like, oh shit, is this gonna happen? Are people gonna come out and sort of write and sort of connect to this project? And so it really, really sort of grew and became this amazing sort of outreach. And so, I'm always thinking about ways in which, as an artist, that sort of civic sort of part of my practice, that it does not, it's not about me, but how do I find ways to sort of fold in all of us? That collectively we are living in a world that we have to figure out how we're going to do it together. And so that was that. This is a public piece at the Harlem subway stop in Chicago. So which is on the sort of southwest side. And then also during COVID, I did a project with my partner, Bob Faust, where we worked with the City of Chicago commissioner and did the sort of the series of trains that would just be traveling throughout the city. And so again, as a billboard, as a messaging sort of place, and then in the ceilings of the train. Yeah, I'm sure my time is up. But, I didn't put this together. So I'm sure there's there has to be many more slides to follow, but we can just stop.
Very sorry that we went over time. I'm very sorry that we have no more time for questions. I clearly failed as a moderator, but I think you'll agree that it was time very well spent with these incredible artists. If you're like me, you're still digesting the former panel and now this one. So even though they're leaving, I know that this knowledge and their generosity is going to stay with us. So thank you very, very much.